What would you do if, out of the night, a dog stumbled into your headlights with a burlap sack tied over its head? On a rain-slick road outside Nashville, a German shepherd limped into the beam of light, body swaying as though the very act of walking cost him more than he had left to give. Rope burns ringed his throat, his eyes still scanning the darkness as though searching for something gentler than the cruelty that had marked him. Whoever left him here had never intended for him to live. But Rhett Lawson, former U.S. Marine, slammed on the brakes, flung the door open, and stepped into the storm. And in the second his eyes met the animals, a memory long buried began to rise. Behind those eyes were echoes of hidden barns, of chained lives, of a trade people profited from while pretending not to see. No one could have predicted what the shepherd would do next. No one could guess how far a wounded heart would go to guard a child. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no soul, human or animal, should ever be abandoned, hit subscribe. This story might just restore your faith in miracles. The outskirts of Nashville held the sweetness that lingers in the air after a summer storm. Cicadas sang their crooked music in the weeds beside the highway while thunder rolled off to the south. Sodium lamps smeared amber light across a lonely two-lane stretch that cut through pasture and oak scrub, the kind of back-road delivery drivers took when the main routes choked with honky-tonk traffic. Rhett guided his battered white work truck with the steady precision that comes from repetition. He was 36, 6 feet tall, broad in the shoulders from the core but lean from years of restless nights. His dark hair, cropped close more from habit than requirement, had already started to gray at the temples. A pale scar curved across his right cheek like a question no one dared ask. The dashboard smelled of stale coffee and engine heat. From the mirror dangled 2 tags, one stamped Lawson, Rhett T., the other Alvarez, Miguel. To the men who once shared dust and bad jokes behind Hesco barriers, that second name was Miggs. The absence of a ring on Rhett's finger pressed heavier than any gear he'd ever carried. Sarah had once teased him about his sentinel's gaze, that faraway look Marines get when they're scanning horizons no one else can see. She had been tall, with a laugh made for porches, and hands that coaxed fear into breathing again. A cardiac nurse who knew too well the fragility of life. One winter, her own fragile rhythm had faltered and failed. Grief had remade Rhett more than the Corps ever had, sanding away bravado, leaving patience and a discipline tender enough to last. Sarah had taught him strength wasn't just force, it was showing up again and again, even when you were empty. The window cracked open, letting wet air brush his face, when something stirred at the bend in the road where Sweetgums leaned close. A shape staggered into the light, too low, too heavy in the chest for deer. As the beam swept across the shoulder, Rhett saw what should have been impossible. A head covered in burlap. Twine cinched so deep into the neck it cut shadows into the fur. He eased the truck into a crawl, hazard lights ticking like a nervous pulse. The silhouette, German shepherd by the cut of it, carried the proud frame of its breed, but hunger had hollowed it. The dog stumbled, caught himself, and pressed forward like sheer movement could outpace the cruelty chasing him. Rhett nosed the truck onto the shoulder, gravel popping under the tires. He shifted into park and sat for a beat, hand curved over the keys. Predator or trap, his training warned. He scanned the dark. No vehicles. No tire tracks. No shapes among the trees. Only wind whispering through tall grass and the far-off hum of the interstate. His phone hovered over Sheriff Morrison's contact. Morrison, mid-50s, long and spare as a fence post, steady as a man born for porch lights rather than stadium lights. A sheriff who listened like your story mattered. Rhett's thumb froze on the call button. The shepherd pitched sideways, catching himself with a shudder that spoke more of will than strength. And just like that, something raw and red cracked open inside Rhett, the smell of dust, of blood, of desert heat. Miggs Alvarez laughing just before the world went wrong. He would call. But first, he would be gentle. He slid the phone into his pocket, opened the door, and dropped to the gravel. His boots made the kind of sound that meant a decision had been made. Easy, Rhett said, the same tone he'd used on frightened recruits and grieving families. Up close, the truth was worse. The shepherd, male, 3, maybe 4 years old, panted shallowly around a dry tongue. His ribs showed like music notes beneath a coat that should have gleamed black and tan but was dulled by neglect. One ear stood proud, the other had been torn, scabbed over without care. The sack hung damp, stained by breath. Twine had burned into the skin, hours, maybe days. His paws were raw from miles walked without rest. And yet, he held himself like something unbroken. Rhett crouched low, joints aching, and laid a hand open on the gravel where the dog could sense him. "I've got you." The shepherd flinched at a distant siren, nearly toppling. A muffled whine leaked from under the sack, a reflex born of old fear. "You're all right," Rhett murmured. "Even if you don't know it yet." Slow, deliberate, he reached for the twine. The knot was cruelly efficient, the kind tied by someone who mistook control for power. The dog quivered but did not snap, and that told Rhett everything. His multi-tool clicked open softly. "Sharp," he warned, as though tonight, man and dog spoke the same tongue. He cut. The twine slackened. Breath quickened inside the sack. Memories of Sarah teaching him to time compressions to a song came unbidden. Rhythm saves more lives than force. He cut again. The twine fell free. Rhett tugged the sack upward. Blinking against hazard strobes, the shepherd's eyes caught his, deep, rain-dark brown. Fear first, then confusion, then a faint flicker of something the world hadn't managed to crush. The dog bumped Rhett's knee, startled by his own courage, then shrank back as though reaching out might be punished. "No sorries here," Rhett whispered. The glow of his phone startled the dog again, paw pressing onto Rhett's boot like an anchor. That trembling weight undid him in a way battle never had. "You and me," Rhett said, hand sliding gently over scarred skin. "Tonight we start over." He didn't give him a name yet, names were promises. But he guided the shepherd toward the passenger door. The dog hesitated, then, with a final tremble, climbed inside. The sack lay abandoned in the gutter. In the truck window, their reflection looked almost like family, a man learning gentleness, and a dog with every reason to believe night only ever brought worse. And yet, in that moment, a spark flickered between them. A door opened. Just past midnight, Rhett eased the truck into the narrow alley behind Kowalsskís' diner. Rain dotted the windshield, clinging like thoughts that refused to let go. The diner itself was a Nashville relic, brick walls darkened by decades of grease and laughter, neon buzzing faintly in the damp night. For truckers, locals, and the occasional wandering musician, it had always been a place of shelter. For Rhett, the 2 small rooms above had been home ever since Sarah's passing. He had grown used to the muffled clatter of dishes below and the smell of bacon and yeast drifting up through the floorboards, noises that reminded him the world still turned, even when his own had stopped. In the passenger seat, the German shepherd curled tight against Rhett's jacket, ribs sharp under battered fur. His breathing rasped like an old motor refusing to quit, but he hadn't once bared teeth or tried to flee. Survival clung to him. "All right, buddy," Rhett murmured, cutting the engine. "Not much, but it's dry." The back door swung open before he could reach the stairs. Walter Kowalsskís, stocky and barrel-chested even in his 70s, peered out. His silver crown of hair glistened faintly in the lamplight, and his voice carried the rasp of old Polish consonants. "You bring company?" he asked, squinting toward the shadowed form in the cab. Rhett slid his arms under the shepherd, surprised at how light he was. All sinew and bone, too little flesh for a frame meant to carry strength. "Found him on the road," Rhett said quietly. "Somebody tried to throw him away." Maria Kowalsskís appeared behind her husband, tall, reed slim, hair in a braided bun that never seemed to loosen. She had the sharper tongue of the two, but her generosity always betrayed itself. Her lips tightened as her eyes took in the dog. "Animals tell the truth about people," she muttered, fetching a folded blanket without another word. Walter, ever practical, grabbed the first aid kit meant for kitchen burns. Together, the couple guided Rhett upstairs, their footsteps soft on the worn wood. The apartment was small, just a living space, a kitchenette, and a sagging couch. The shepherd hesitated on the threshold, claws clicking nervously against the floor. Rhett laid the blanket down and lowered him gently. For the first time since the roadside, Rhett let the thought solidify into words. He leaned close, whispering. Valor. That's your name now. Valor. The shepherd blinked. His ears twitched. He could not understand English in the way people did, but something in his body seemed to loosen, as if the word itself carried a weight worth holding. Maria knelt with surprising tenderness, dabbing peroxide against rope burns while murmuring softly in Polish. So many scars, she said, shaking her head. But the eyes, they still look for kindness. Walter handed Rhett strips of clean cloth, and together they wrapped the wounds. They offered scraps of roasted chicken cooled from the evening shift. Valor sniffed cautiously before chewing in small, mechanical bites, like a creature trying to remember what food meant. A sudden patter of footsteps broke the quiet. From the hall emerged Sophie, the upstairs neighbor's 7-year-old daughter. Hazel eyes wide, hair in pigtails, she clutched a crust of bread wrapped in napkin. Shy with strangers, fearless with dogs. Mama said he looked hungry, she said, holding out the bread. Valor sniffed, then accepted it gently. His tail thumped once against the blanket, the first flicker of joy Rhett had seen. Sophie's grin spread bright as dawn. He likes me. Maria ushered her back with a smile, promising she could visit again tomorrow. Later, when the Kowalsskís had gone downstairs and the apartment settled into the rhythm of the night, Rhett pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered, then pressed call. A small, sleepy voice answered. Daddy. Ella Lawson, 6 years old, with her mother's long lashes and a frailty that had nothing to do with spirit. She lived with her grandmother Ruth Whitaker, a stout, no-nonsense woman who watched over her with hawk-like vigilance. Hey, Bug, Rhett said softly. Up late? I dreamed about Mama's garden, Ella whispered. Did you work tonight? Yeah, he said. His eyes fell to the shepherd curled at his feet. But I've got someone new here. A friend. A dog, she guessed instantly, her voice lifting. Rhett smiled despite himself. A shepherd. Name's Valor. Like brave? Yeah. Like brave. Valor shifted, ears flicking at the tone of his voice, the bond already forming, silent but undeniable. Rhett promised Ella he'd see her that weekend, told her to listen to Grandma, and ended the call with a lump lodged in his throat. He looked at Valor, who met his gaze with a steadiness born of weariness, as though testing whether promises meant anything here. She'd like you, Rhett whispered. She needs someone strong on her side. From the street below, a siren wailed sharp against the brick alleys. Valor shot upright, ears flat, body trembling. The bark that ripped out of him rattled the windows, raw and guttural, not anger but remembered terror. Rhett dropped to a knee, hands pressed firm against the shepherd's scarred shoulders. Easy, boy. Easy. But Valor barked again, claws scrabbling against the floorboards, chest heaving as though the siren had dragged him back into another kind of cage. Slowly, the sound faded into the distance, leaving the clatter of dishes below and the hum of the radiator. Valor's body sagged, exhausted by his own fear, leaning into Rhett as though needing him to anchor the world. You're not alone anymore, Rhett whispered, stroking coarse fur with words he had once used for frightened recruits in desert storms. You're with me. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Rhett felt the weight of those words bind him too. Morning crept through the blinds, stripes of light falling across Valor's battered coat. The scent of frying bacon drifted up from the diner below, as if promising the simple gift of ordinary life. Rhett sat with a cooling cup of coffee, watching the shepherd doze. For the first time in years, he had woken not from nightmares, but to the sound of steady, living breath near his feet. By mid-morning, a knock sounded on Rhett's doorframe. Walter Kowalsskís stood there, one thick hand resting against the wood, his voice steady as bread dough being kneaded. "You take him to the vet today," he said simply. Walter was not a man who wasted words. He had spent his life working flour and heat into loaves and knew when something fragile needed the right kind of hands. Rhett nodded. He had already been thinking the same. The clinic sat on the edge of the neighborhood, a squat brick building brightened by murals of paw prints painted by local school kids. Inside, the scent of antiseptic clung to the walls, softened faintly by dog biscuits in a jar at the counter. Valor resisted at the threshold, claws skidding against the tiled floor. Rhett crouched, murmured low, and the shepherd pressed against his leg, guided only by the familiar steadiness of his voice. Dr. Leah Monroe entered, auburn hair tied loosely, green eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. Mid-30s, she wore a canvas apron over her scrubs, its pockets filled with thermometers and tongue depressors. She had the quiet steadiness of someone who had stood through long nights of pain and still managed to offer calm in the morning. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed when she saw Valor. She knelt immediately, hands gentle but efficient. Fingers pressed ribs, checked gums, and traced the fur where scars interrupted what should have been smooth. "Underweight by at least 15 pounds, she murmured. "Old scars here, and here. Rope burns across the neck. This ear, torn from fighting, I'd bet." Rhett's frown deepened. "Fighting?" Dr. Monroe peeled off her gloves, her voice flat, clinical, refusing to dress the truth with softness. "There are illegal operations scattered across Tennessee. Hidden kennels, makeshift rings. They train shepherds, mastiffs, even strays. Some guard meth labs. Others get thrown into pits for money. People pay to watch blood." She hesitated, meeting Rhett's eyes. "And when the dogs are too broken to fight, they're discarded." Valor flinched at the rustle of paper towels, body coiling as if bracing for a blow. Rhett caught his paw gently, steadying him, whispering his name until the tremor eased. Monroe noticed and gave a small nod. "He trusts you already," she said softly. "That's rare after what he's been through." She scribbled notes on the chart, then lowered her voice. "You should know, there's been talk. Some of the Amish farms north of here, nothing proven, of course, but too many dogs with injuries like this trace back near those communities. They keep to themselves, and outsiders don't get far. But I've seen the patterns." Rhett's jaw tightened. Nashville had always been a city of music and redemption, but its shadows carried cruelty too. He had fought men overseas who treated pain like currency. The same trade existed here, not for ideology, but for profit. The exam ended with Monroe handing him antibiotics and instructions. "Small meals, soft bedding, patience. He's a survivor. Give him reason to believe tomorrow exists, and you'll see his spirit surface." And Rhett, her gaze sharpened. "If you hear anything, see anything, tell Sheriff Morrison. He's been trying to crack one of these rings for years." Back at the apartment, Rhett sat cross-legged on the floor, tucking a pill inside a piece of chicken. Valor sniffed, hesitated, then ate, his paw pressing against Rhett's thigh as though anchoring him. Rhett reached for his phone. Morrison's name glowed on the screen. His thumb hovered, Monroe's warning echoing in his head. That was when Valor's body stiffened. His claws hooked into Rhett's jeans, trembling, paw dragging desperately as though pleading, "Don't leave me, don't send me back, don't make me another statistic." Rhett froze. He had seen signals like this before, in recruits on the edge of collapse, in allies whose silence spoke louder than words. Valor had no language, but his grip was clear. Rhett slid the phone back into his pocket, resting his hand on the dog's scarred back. "Not yet," he whispered. "I hear you." Downstairs, dishes clattered as the diner filled for lunch. Sophie's laughter rang like a bell amid the noise. Life pressed on, ordinary and bright. But in the small apartment above, a Marine and a broken shepherd sat bound together by a fragile accord. Trust, fragile as glass, hung in the balance. The Tennessee sun burned through haze by late morning, turning the diner's windows into glowing squares of gold. Rhett rose early, as always. Habit was etched into his bones, reveille, roll call, routine. Valor stirred stiffly at his feet, scars tugging against skin, but his spirit rose with him, stubborn and steady. The apartment was cramped, yet Rhett treated it like barracks. Bed made sharp. Dishes rinsed. Boots lined by the door. The discipline wasn't only for him. It was for Valor, too, a structure that said the world could be safe again. Training began in the alley behind Kowalsskís, where dumpsters lined the walls and the hum of the interstate floated over rooftops. Rhett wore a faded Marine PT shirt, sweat darkening the collar. No whip. No harsh tools. Only a length of rope for a lead, and his voice. "Sit," he commanded softly. Valor hesitated, head tilting as though suspicion outweighed obedience. Then, slowly, he lowered his haunches. "Good." Again. Rhett's reward wasn't food but touch, a firm stroke down the back, the kind of reassurance Marines gave one another in foxholes. Each command measured, each correction patient. Rhett knew what cruelty did to the spirit. He would not break this dog down, he would build him back with trust. From the doorway, Maria Kowalsskís watched, arms folded, apron dusted with flour. "Like soldier, like dog," she muttered, though her eyes softened. Walter chuckled, cap tilted back. Both stubborn as mules. They had seen broken men and broken animals before, but watching Rhett and Valor together, they believed healing was possible. That Saturday, Ruth Whitaker arrived with Ella. Ruth stood like an oak tree in the shade, stout, silver-haired, eyes sharp from years of loss and vigilance. She had buried her daughter, Sarah, and her grief had calcified into a fierce kind of love expressed in chores and discipline. She trusted little, especially when it came to Ella's safety. Ella herself bounded across the alley, 6 years old, thin frame wrapped in a yellow sundress, sandals slapping the pavement. She had Sarah's wide eyes, lashes like wings, and delicate hands. Fragile in body, but her laughter carried a spark that even seizures hadn't stolen. She knelt before Valor as though greeting an old friend. "Hi," she whispered. The shepherd sniffed, tail swishing once, then twice, before pressing his head into her chest. Ella giggled, wrapping arms around his scarred neck. Ruth frowned, arms crossed. "You sure that animal's safe?" Rhett met her gaze. "Safer than most men I've known." Days passed in a rhythm of small victories. Short training sessions. Gentle meals. Ella visiting with crayons and stories. She would sit on the floor, drawing crooked horses and bright suns, Valor stretched beside her, muzzle resting on her knee. The bond grew natural, like vines reaching for light. Rhett watched from the doorway, warmth stirring in his chest that grief had long buried. Sarah had always said children and animals spoke a language of trust unspoken. Watching Ella and Valor, Rhett finally believed it. One heavy afternoon, cicadas screamed so loud it rattled nerves. Ella colored on the rug while Rhett brewed tea in the kitchenette. Valor lay nearby, ears flicking at each squeak of crayon against paper. Then it happened. The crayon slipped from Ella's hand, rolling under the couch. Her small body stiffened, muscles jerking to a cruel rhythm Rhett dreaded. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the counter. "Ella!" But Valor moved first. The shepherd sprang, pressing his body against Ella's side to keep her from striking the floor. He barked once, sharp and commanding, not panic, but alert. Rhett dropped to his knees, sliding a pillow under his daughter's head, his hands steady though his chest thundered like artillery fire. Valor lowered his head, whining softly, eyes locked on Rhett as if to say, "I've got her flank, you take the front." Together, they shielded the child until the storm passed. Minutes later, Ella's breathing slowed, lashes fluttering, sweat dampening her hair. She blinked weakly, the tremor fading. Valor licked her hand once, then rested his head there, refusing to move. Ruth had rushed in at the sound of breaking glass. Her sternness cracked into trembling relief as she knelt beside her granddaughter. "I told you she needed constant watch," she whispered. "She has it now," Rhett said, eyes wet. He glanced at Valor. "More than ever." That night, after the diner's neon sign hummed into silence, Rhett sat on the couch with Valor curled against his side. In the lamplight, the shepherd's scars glimmered faintly. Not as wounds anymore, but as the marks of survival. Tonight, Valor was no victim. He was guardian. Comrade. The kind of brother every Marine prayed would watch his back. Rhett rubbed the fur behind his ears. "You're not just brave," he whispered. "You're family." Valor's tail tapped once against the floorboards, a soldier's acknowledgement of orders understood. The diner downstairs had long gone dark, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the night when the knock came. Not loud, not urgent, 3 deliberate raps, evenly spaced. The kind of knock from someone who didn't expect to be turned away. Rhett opened the door cautiously, shoulders squared. On the landing stood a man who looked carved from another century. Tall, broad in the shoulders, his beard full and streaked with gray that caught the light. A wide-brimmed straw hat shaded pale blue eyes, his clothing plain, black trousers, suspenders, a collarless shirt buttoned to the throat. His boots were worn, soil still clinging to the soles. "My name is Eli Burr," he said in a voice calm but commanding. "Minister of the settlement north of town." His words came slowly, as though rehearsed. "There is a shepherd dog. Black and tan. Scarred ear. He belongs to us. He ran from one of our farms." Behind Rhett, Valor had been resting on the rug. At the sound of the voice, he bolted upright. His body stiffened, ears flattened, and a sound rose low and primal from his chest. Panic flashed in his eyes, not anger but something deeper, recognition. He scrambled backward, nails clattering on the floorboards, then lunged for the bedroom. Bark after bark exploded, raw and furious, rattling the windows. Rhett grabbed his collar, feeling tremors roll through every muscle. Eli Burr's pale gaze flicked to the dog, then back to Rhett. His tone sharpened. "He remembers. He is trained to us. We will take him back." Rhett's stance hardened. Shoulders squared, jaw locked. "He's not yours anymore." The silence between them was taut, broken only by Valor's barking behind the half-closed door. Burr's expression never wavered, but in his eyes glimmered something cold, not request, but inevitability. He tipped his hat politely, turned, and descended the narrow stairwell. Rhett shut the door hard, leaning against it, his chest tight. Dr. Monroe's warning replayed in his head, whispers of Amish-linked kennels, dogs broken under the cover of tradition. He had wanted to dismiss it. But Valor's visceral terror left no room for doubt. The next morning, Rhett drove to the sheriff's station. The building was small, brick walls polished by years of use. Inside, the smell of coffee clung to old wood. Sheriff Daniel Morrison looked up from his desk, his face lined by fatigue but calm as ever. Mid-50s, lean as a fence post, Morrison carried his uniform with quiet authority. Badge gleaming, boots polished, his presence was steady as a fence line that never failed in a storm. Rhett laid out what happened. Burr's visit. Valor's reaction. The demand to return him. Morrison listened in silence, hands folded, blue eyes thoughtful. When Rhett finished, the sheriff sighed. "I've heard whispers. Dogs disappearing. Others showing up half dead or meaner than sin. But the Amish? They close ranks. Unless someone inside talks, proving anything's near impossible. Push too hard, and they'll claim you're meddling in faith. Folks around here don't take kindly to outsiders prying." Rhett's jaw clenched. So I'm supposed to hand him back? Morrison shook his head. No. I didn't say that. Just, be careful. You don't know how deep this runs. They'll come quiet, they'll come polite, but they'll come again. He leaned forward, voice low. Keep your eyes open, Marine. And don't let him out of your sight. That night, summer heat pressed heavy through the open window. Valor twitched in his sleep, haunted by dreams, while Rhett lay awake on the couch. Around 2 a.m, a sharp scrape jolted him upright. His hand instinctively reached for the baseball bat by the door. Another sound, not outside, but from the small garden behind the diner. Barefoot, he stepped out. The night air clung damp and sticky to his skin. Under the hazy glow of a street lamp, Valor was digging with frantic urgency. His paws tore the soil, earth flying in bursts. Rhett knelt, trying to calm him, but the shepherd ignored every word, driven by something older than comfort. Then his claws struck something solid. With a whine, Valor unearthed a fragment, a strip of hardened leather, dark with sweat and soil. Rope. Cracked, frayed at the ends, the kind used to bind. Valor pawed at it again and again, chest heaving, body trembling with memory. Rhett turned the fragment over in his hand, bile rising in his throat. It wasn't just evidence. It was a ghost. Proof that Valor's scars had roots in cruelty, not chance. He sat back in the dirt, Valor pressing against him, both staring at the scrap in silence. The shepherd leaned into his chest, ragged breath rising and falling as though needing Rhett to anchor him. And Rhett knew then, this wasn't only about saving one dog. It was about going against the machinery of men who profited from pain. Late summer evenings softened the upstairs apartment into something almost sacred. The small table, its surface scarred by years of tenants' coffee cups and homework, now carried steaming plates of roast chicken and potatoes. Walter and Maria sat across from Rhett, their weathered hands joined briefly in prayer before eating. Ella leaned forward, her small hands folded, whispering a clumsy blessing that included Daddy, Grandma, Valor, and even Mr. Kowalsskís' bread rolls. Under the table, Valor stretched out, scarred body relaxed, head resting on his paws. Each time Ella's foot brushed his side, his tail tapped once, steady as a drumbeat. In that glow of lamplight, Rhett felt something he hadn't in years, home. And yet his mind churned. He could still see Eli Burr's pale eyes, still hear Sheriff Morrison's warning that, they'll come quiet, but they'll come again. Maria noticed his silence. Age had streaked her dark hair with silver, but her spine remained straight, her sharp tongue still quick when needed. She reached across, tapping the table with her finger. You think too much, she scolded softly. Family is not thought. It is chosen. Walter nodded, his accent rough but steady. Blood can betray. Chosen family does not. Rhett looked at Ella, who giggled as she slipped Valor bits of potato when she thought no one was watching. The shepherd accepted each piece gently, eyes soft when they met hers. She had claimed him as her own without hesitation, folding him into her circle of trust. Something uncoiled inside Rhett then, a knot that had been tightening since Sarah died. Maybe Maria was right. Family wasn't just given. Sometimes, it was made. The weeks that followed carried a rhythm Rhett had forgotten he could love. Ella's laughter echoing through the apartment. Sophie knocking at the door to show Valor her new jump rope. Walter teaching Ella how to braid dough in the diner's kitchen while Maria scolded them both for making a mess. Rhett's grief hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, reshaped by routine and the presence of people, and one dog, who made life feel worth tending again. One evening, Rhett returned from a long haul to find Ella asleep on the couch, a blanket tangled around her. Valor lay curled protectively around her, head resting on her lap. Her hand had fallen against his neck as if holding him even in dreams. Rhett stood in the doorway for a long time, something breaking and mending inside him at once. But peace never stayed. Near midnight, another knock rattled the door. Harder this time. Insistent. Rhett motioned for Maria to take Ella into the back room. Valor stiffened, hackles up, a low growl thrumming from his chest. When Rhett opened the door, two men stood on the landing. Not dressed plain like Eli Burr, but rough. One heavy-set, hair cropped close, a faded tattoo curling from under his sleeve. The other wiry, sharp-eyed, chewing a toothpick with insolent calm. Their boots bore soil, and something darker. "We're here for the dog," the heavy one said, voice flat. "He don't belong to you." Rhett's jaw tightened. Behind him, Valor barked once, a sound like thunder splitting the night. The wiry man's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what that mutt's worth." Rhett stepped forward, filling the doorway with marine stillness. Shoulders squared, voice iron. "He belongs to me now. He belongs to my family. You want him, you'll go through me." The two men exchanged a glance, weighing risk against reward. They hadn't expected a Marine's stance, someone who had stood in worse doorways than this. The wiry one spat his toothpick onto the step. "This ain't over," he muttered. They retreated into the shadows, boots fading down the alley. Rhett shut the door hard, locking it. His heart pounded, but his face stayed steady. Valor pressed against his leg, tail stiff, eyes sharp, waiting for the order to defend. Rhett crouched, gripping the shepherd's scruff. His voice was fierce, low enough only Valor could hear. "No one's taking you. Not now. Not ever." And in that moment, with Ella asleep in the back room and the Kowalsskís standing behind him, Rhett knew something with absolute clarity: families weren't always born in blood. Sometimes, they were forged in fire, in standing your ground when the world tried to steal what you loved. The courthouse in downtown Nashville loomed like a relic of another century, white columns rising above the square, magnolia trees casting shade across benches worn smooth by time. That morning, reporters swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed in bursts that felt more like lightning than light. Rhett adjusted his tie, borrowed from Walter, too wide, patterned with tiny blue diamonds. His hand rested low on Valor's back as they climbed the stairs together. The shepherd moved with quiet vigilance, his coat brushed until scars only faintly showed, his gaze sharp as if he understood this was another kind of battlefield. Beside them walked Rebecca Martinez, early 40s, olive skin, dark hair swept back into a tight bun. Her slate-gray suit was tailored but practical, a leather briefcase tucked under her arm. Known in Nashville's courts for her conviction, she carried a reputation for dismantling hostile witnesses with little more than a raised brow. Her empathy had teeth, and she wasn't afraid to use them. Years ago, she had lost her younger brother to the same underworld of fighting rings. Ever since, every case had been personal. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polish and nerves. Journalists filled the gallery, pens scratching. In the second row, Ella sat with Ruth, clutching Valor's old rope toy like a talisman. Walter and Maria sat nearby, heads bowed in prayer, hands entwined. Sheriff Morrison leaned against the back wall, his presence quiet but unshakable. The defendants sat stiff at the front, Eli Burr among them. Plain clothes. Stoic faces. Piety worn like armor. But beneath it all, rot. Rhett's jaw tightened when Eli's pale eyes slid briefly toward Valor. The shepherd stiffened too, pressing closer, a tremor running through him before he steadied himself. Rebecca began with evidence. Photographs of scarred dogs. Veterinary reports from Dr. Monroe. Chains and harnesses pulled from barns. Witnesses followed. Neighbors who had heard barking late at night. A farmhand who had quit after seeing dogs starved into obedience. Dr. Monroe herself, steady as ever, detailing injuries that spoke louder than words. Through it all, Rhett sat straight-backed, marine stillness disguising the storm inside him. When called to testify, his voice was low but firm. He described the night he found Valor staggering under a burlap sack. The scars that told their own story. The way sirens shattered him into panic. He spoke of Ella's seizure, of Valor's instinctive protection. His voice caught, but he pressed on. He's not just a dog, Rhett told the jury. He's a soldier who survived a war most of us never saw. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors leaned in. Even Judge Naomi Whitfield, silver-haired, pearl earrings glinting, adjusted her glasses and looked softly toward Valor, who sat tall beside Rhett, scars bared yet dignity intact. Outside, the media storm raged. Reporters crowded Rhett during recess. "Marine, are you saying the Amish run fighting rings? What makes this dog different from any other stray?" Rhett shielded Ella behind him, Valor steady at his side. His voice clipped. "Ask me about the men who hurt him. Don't ask me about my daughter. Don't ask me about my dog. They've carried enough." Rebecca cut in then, dispersing the reporters with cool ferocity. In the pews, Maria whispered prayers. Walter kept an arm around her shoulders. Even townsfolk Rhett barely knew had filled the benches, drawn by the sight of one scarred shepherd and the Marine who refused to surrender him. When closing arguments came, Rebecca rose like a general. Her words cut sharp. "These men are not farmers. They are profiteers. They cloak cruelty in tradition. This dog," she pointed to Valor, "carries their sins carved into his skin. But look at him now. Look at what love and discipline can restore. They did not break his soul. They only tried." The defense droned on about property, about misunderstandings, about cultural differences. But the jury's eyes kept drifting back to Valor, seated straight, tail curled around his paws, gaze steady and unyielding. Finally, Judge Whitfield called for statements. Rhett rose, Valor at his side. His words carried through the chamber, steady as a drumbeat. "Valor is not just a dog. He is a survivor. A warrior. Proof of what cruelty can try to erase, and what hope refuses to surrender. And we will not be silent anymore." The courtroom hushed. For a heartbeat, it seemed the entire town breathed as one. Reporters. Neighbors. Even the weary sheriff at the back. In that silence, it was clear, the truth had been spoken. And it could not be taken back. 6 months passed, smoothing jagged days into something steady. The trial had ended with convictions. The ring dismantled. Valor's scars no longer whispered of abuse but spoke of survival. Rhett saved every paycheck from long hauls, took advice from Walter on mortgages, and walked acres until he found it, a small farmstead just outside Nashville. The house sagged but stood honest, clapboard walls weathered yet strong. Fields stretched wide, tall grass rippling like water under the wind. A barn leaned east, its timbers tired but waiting. The cellar included a chestnut mare named Buttercup, her mane tangled but her eyes soft, quick to warm beneath Ella's touch. Ella gasped when she saw her. She rode at a careful walk under Ruth's vigilant eye, laughter scattering across the fields like sunlight. Ruth had been skeptical of farm life at first, so much risk, so much work. But watching her granddaughter's cheeks flush with country air, she admitted the land was shaping them into something stronger than walls alone could make. Walter and Maria slowed with age, but the farm gave them purpose. Walter knelt in the garden rows, thick hands surprisingly tender as he pressed seeds into soil, telling Ella tomatoes grew sweeter when spoken to kindly. Maria supervised from the porch, straw hat shading her face, sharp words softened into encouragement. She still scolded Rhett if weeds climbed too high. Valor thrived in the open space. His coat grew glossy with good meals, though the bent ear and faint scars never faded. He chased sparrows from the rafters, patrolled the fence line with a soldier's diligence, and stretched in the grass with ears flicking, always alert. To Ella, he was not just a dog, he was her knight, shadowing each step with loyalty no leash could contain. Rhett found peace in labor. He mended fences, painted shutters, stacked hay. At night, he sat on the porch with coffee in hand, Valor at his feet, Ella curled beside him under a quilt Maria had stitched. Sometimes Ruth joined them, her sternness thawed into quiet pride as she watched her granddaughter safe and smiling. One crisp autumn morning, Rhett returned from town with Rebecca Martinez. The last papers had been signed, stamped, made permanent. He parked the truck in the gravel drive, jacket pocket heavy with folded documents. Ella came running from the barn, cheeks smudged with dust, Valor bounding after her with ears perked. Rhett knelt in the grass, pulling the shepherd close. "It's done," he whispered, pressing his forehead to Valor's. "You're one of us now. Official. Valor Lawson." The shepherd wagged his tail once, solemn and sure, then leaned into Rhett's chest. Ella squealed, wrapping her arms around them both. Even Walter, watching from the porch, wiped at his eyes when he thought no one saw. "You weren't just rescued," Rhett said, his voice breaking. "You rescued us. You made us a family again." Above them, the Tennessee sky arched wide and blue, clouds brushed across it like a canvas. Fields stretched open, a promise waiting. In that moment, the scars of the past no longer defined them. They had chosen one another, not by blood, but by love, by loyalty, by courage. And that choice had made all the difference. This story reminds us that miracles often come quiet, in loyalty, in second chances, in love that heals what cruelty tried to destroy. Valor was more than a rescued dog. He was proof that redemption arrives in ordinary moments, when broken lives choose each other. Just as Rhett found new purpose, and Ella found protection, we too can believe that grace works through our hands, a kind word, a helping hand, an open heart. And it is in those small acts that God's light shines brightest. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe for more stories of hope and redemption. And may God bless you and your family, surrounding you always with His protection.